Hey, what's going on everyone? Justin here at Trumful Reads, and as you can see from the location of this video, out on the canoe on a lake. Just thought it'd be something a little bit different than the usual. Instead of a literary walk, it's kind of like a literary paddle or something, except I can't really paddle the canoe with one hand, so you know. But yeah, I apologize for not putting any videos up. Just been kind of like lazy after my hand accident, as you guys saw in my last video and stuff. But yeah, in this video I just wanted to give you an update on the readathon for the month of July, the book Junkie trials that I'm participating in. And I finally finished the 5th book. I know, pretty late so I have completed the quest for the Grail, the book of Grail so far. So I want to talk about the 5 books that I read. And as you can see, some jet skiers and stuff. I guess it's just sea-doos and stuff. But anyways, the 5 books that I've read so far during the readathon. The first one being a reread was the challenge, and I read The Historian's Craft by Mark Bloch. Just a fantastic read. Obviously I knew that going into it because I've read it before. Mark Bloch, if you guys don't know, was a famous medieval historian who wrote a 2-volume set called Feudal Society, which is kind of the gold standard in understanding like manorialism and feudalism, that sort of thing. But also his like personal life story is pretty epic as well. He was part of the French resistance in World War II before he got captured, and while he was writing The Historian's Craft, he was kind of like one of the local leaders of the French resistance against the Nazis in Vichy, France. He did get captured and was executed by the Nazis, I think it's either 1944 or 1945. But anyways, this was sort of a work he was working on, and it's kind of interesting, some of his footnotes. He kind of apologizes that he doesn't have his whole library and stuff. So it's just a really interesting work, just kind of explaining what history is all about and how one should really go about, you know, writing history and historical analysis and using sources and different examples and things like that. It's just a really fun read, especially if you enjoy history like me. But yeah, let's go on to the next one. The next one was a book featuring royalty of some kind. And I kind of messed this one up because I read Fantasties by George MacDonald, and this is considered one of the earliest fantasy books ever written. I think it was 1848, either 1848 or 1858, something like that. So really, really early. I thought there is like a queen in the book, but it's kind of like a brief sort of thing, I guess. But it's an interesting little tale. Like the selling point of the book is it's a fairy tale for grown-ups, and this was, like I said, the first, you know, genre fantasy book really, before fantasy obviously was even really a thing. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Essentially the narrator gets sucked into like a different world, and he kind of strives for this sort of ideal that he aspires to when he sort of falls in love with this kind of beautiful fairy enchantress thing, and it's kind of his journey of coming to a realization that that ideal is not all that it's cracked up to be, and kind of moving on from that. So I thought it was kind of fun. Next book was to read the next book, and the challenge was to read the next book in a series, and I went with, what did I go with? The Guns of Empire by Django Wexler, and this is the 4th book in the Shadow Campaign series. Book 4 out of 5, and this one also was fantastic. Books 1, 3, and 4 have been really good. Book 2 was a little bit of a letdown, but books 3 and 4 I've definitely picked up where the first one sort of left off. We got some really awesome characters still. Obviously, Winter Ironglass being my favorite character so far. Obviously, probably just kind of sticking with the favorite character through book 5 if I had to guess. And basically, her role is as a female who has disguised herself as a male to join her country's military. And this is sort of a flintlock fantasy that takes place sort of like 1700s era technology, mostly with black powder muskets, stuff like that. There are some rifles, but they're kind of considered, you know, like elite, kind of, maybe not strange, but elite weapons that not everyone's gonna have use of. But like I said, just a really interesting flintlock fantasy. I think the characters are really well done. Overall, you get 3 different points of view, and like I said, I really enjoy flintlock fantasy, so that's why I'm continuing on with the 5th book, hopefully next month, which is going to be The Infernal Battalion, and finish up the Shadow Campaign series. And let's see, the next challenge was to read a book that would make you sad, and I went with Silent Night by Stanley Weintraub, and this book is about the World War I Christmas truce of 1914. This was a really poignant book, discussing pretty much all aspects of the Western Front during sort of the lead up to the Christmas truce, and sort of what was actually going on there, and how it was different for different sectors, and just sort of how, especially the German, the French, and the English, the guys on the ground that were stuck sort of in, you know, the beginning of the trenches and everything, they really, you know, they almost should have just like rose up and mutinied against their like political leaders at that point, and sort of just sort of ended World War I right there. And that was sort of the personal feeling for almost all of them. And there's a dead fish in the water, someone is pointing out to me. But anyways, it was just interesting seeing sort of how this whole Christmas truce wound up being all sort of at the grassroots level in each different little sector, how both sides would kind of parlay with each other beforehand on Christmas Eve and even a little bit earlier, just asking, you know, let's take Christmas Eve off, let's take, you know, Christmas Day off. Some of them even try to go all the way up through like New Year's Day and everything. And then how kind of the bigwigs and the generals and stuff really disapproved with the lack of fighting spirit and all that between now for them and under them and everything. But it was just interesting to see how the, you know, the guys that were actually doing the fighting and stuff really had no real hatred for each other, especially at that point in the war. And I don't know, just how it could have been a little bit different. But it was interesting to learn that the soccer matches probably were real. I had always had mixed reviews on that when I read it before, how most of it was probably just made up stuff, and that's obviously definitely the case that some of them probably made up some matches between the opposing sides, between, like, you know, the Germans and the English and No Man's Land and stuff. But there are definitely enough accounts, plenty of serious ones, as well as like letters home and everything, that definitely show that there were indeed soccer matches being played, whether that was in No Man's Land or a little bit behind each other's lines and stuff. It's just interesting seeing the different local traditions kind of going on, like some really interesting stories, including one like German chef with his like chef's hat going off into No Man's Land to plant a Christmas tree and everything. But just how, like I said, the men on both sides kind of getting along, trying to get a respite from the war, and, you know, maybe they should have actually been the ones in charge, and, you know, the world would have been quite a bit different place, I think, if they would have had their way. And then lastly, for challenge 5 was to read about searching for something lost. I read The Lost City of Z. Who was that by? I think it's David Graham. And this was kind of a weird-ish book because the narrator is a journalist who got really interested in Colonel Fawcett's journey into the Amazon. Colonel Fawcett was like he was probably like the last of like the old school, you know, rough and tumble explorers, kind of like the Indiana Jones types, and he would go into South America, just into the Amazon, you know, searching for different things, whether that's like, you know, different like fords over rivers and different pathways through the jungle, you know, figuring out borders for the different countries at that point in time in the early 1900s and like 1800s. But the author also kind of what he, I guess, planned to do was to follow in his footsteps, because Colonel Fawcett and his son and then one of his son's friends were leading an expedition, but they were never heard from after like a certain point in the journey, and obviously, you know, no one knows what happened to them, presumed dead, you know, whether that's, you know, killed by some of the locals or they just kind of starved in the jungle and everything, whatever. Though Colonel Fawcett, like, he survived through about like 50 different expeditions all over the world, so he was definitely a tough cookie. But the author, he kept kind of like putting his own vignettes in there, like, you know, him going to the store buying some stuff and going to South America and everything. But it was just like, out of this like 250 page book, there was probably like 10 pages of, you know, his journey into the Amazon and whatnot. So I'm not really sure exactly what he was doing too much, to be honest. He was just driving in this Jeep or 4-track or whatever, until they got to like one little like local village. It didn't sound like it was like really that big a deal with what he was sort of describing, to be honest. So I think he was just trying to do some little character insertion there. But overall, it was still a really good book, learning about sort of that sort of era of, you know, discovering every last place on the map, especially with the British the British Geographic Society and stuff. and how they wanted to basically find, you know, just every single location ever on any continent, any jungle, any place, whatever. And how lots of explorers did die, you know, whether that's out in the Amazon jungle, out in Australia in the desert, things like that. So anyways, it was still just a really fun book. But yeah, those are the 5 books I've read so far for the book Drinking Trials and Achieving the Holy Grail. Got a bunch of others trying to get on with at this point. Tell me what you guys think about any of these books or authors. If you've read any of them, let me know down in the comments below. And if you're participating in the readathon, tell me what your favorite book has been so far. We've got to talk to you about getting some recommendations, stuff like that. Always enjoy that part of communicating with you guys. And whatever you guys end up reading in the month of July for the rest of the next couple of weeks, always remember, read victoriously.